Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into some really fascinating excerpts that you all have sent in to us.
Yeah.
From Noam Chomsky's Secrets, Lies, and Democracy.
Great book.
And we're going to be exploring how power dynamics really shape our world.
Yeah.
Especially looking at the influence of corporations and the hidden agendas behind policies that, on the surface seem beneficial, but maybe there's a little more to the story.
Yeah. Chomsky certainly encourages us to look beyond the surface and question what we often take for granted about the systems.
So let's jump right in and start with this idea of a defective democracy.
Okay.
Chomsky argues that the U.S. promotes a very specific kind of democracy,
Right.
one that ultimately keeps corporations in control.
Yeah.
Does that resonate with you at all?
It's a thought-provoking concept, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Chomsky is contrasting the idealized version of democracy with the reality of how power operates, particularly in a system
Right.
heavily influenced by corporate interests.
He even goes so far as to label corporations as fascist entities.
Right.
That seems pretty extreme, doesn't it?
It's certainly a strong word.
Yeah.
I can see why it might raise eyebrows.
Yeah.
But Chomsky's point is not about aesthetics or uniforms.
Right.
He's drawing a parallel
Okay.
between the rigid top-down power structure within corporations
Okay.
and the characteristics of fascist systems.
Yeah.
Both prioritize a single objective above all else. In the case of corporations, that objective is profit.
So it's about how decisions are made and who benefits,
Right.
not necessarily about specific policies.
Yeah.
If a corporation resembles a fascist system internally,
Yeah.
does that mean it will necessarily act like one externally?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of the debate surrounding corporate power.
Okay.
While corporations might generate some benefits,
Yeah.
for society,
Yeah.
their primary focus
Right.
is always going to be maximizing profit,
Yeah.
even if it comes at the expense of workers or long-term societal well-being.
And Chomsky uses the work of political scientist Thomas Ferguson
Right.
to illustrate how deeply intertwined corporations are with the political system.
Yes.
Can you unpack Ferguson's investment theory of politics for us?
Sure. In essence, Ferguson argues that significant financial resources are required
Okay.
to have any real influence in the political arena.
Yeah.
This creates a system where corporations with their vast wealth
Right.
hold a disproportionate amount of power in shaping public policy.
So it becomes a sort of pay-to-play system where corporations are the main players.
Exactly.
So for everyday citizens like you and me,
Right.
participating in a meaningful way becomes much more difficult.
Yeah.
It's like trying to have your voice heard in a room full of megaphones.
Chomsky even points out how seemingly benign activities like joining the PTA are often touted as civic engagement.
Yeah.
But do these activities truly challenge
Yeah.
the corporate-driven system? Or do they serve as a distraction diverting energy away from more impactful forms of political participation?
It's almost like saying, here, keep busy with these local issues while we take care of the big stuff.
Exactly.
And what's interesting is that Chomsky brings in historical figures like Thomas Jefferson and John Dewey, who expressed similar concerns about the threat corporations pose to democracy.
And their warnings sound particularly relevant in today's context, where corporations have amassed enormous power.
Did you know that the top 200 corporations control over a quarter of the world's total assets?
It's staggering.
That's a staggering concentration of economic influence.
Concentration of economic influence.
It really makes you think about who is truly in control.
For sure.
And what's even more concerning is that this power has been solidified through judicial decisions rather than democratic processes.
Right. Chomsky argues that corporations have achieved significant influence through legal maneuvering and lobbying, often bypassing the will of the people.
Which leads us right into this concept of a welfare state for the rich.
Okay.
It sounds like a contradiction, but Chomsky is exposing how the system is actually rigged in favor of the wealthy and powerful.
He points out that the amount of taxes paid by corporations in the U.S. has drastically declined over the years, shifting the burden onto individual taxpayers.
It's almost like a reverse Robin Hood situation where we're taking from the poor and giving to the rich.
He highlights this with the example of Daimler-Benz, the German auto giant.
Okay.
They essentially received a massive package of financial incentives for the state of Alabama to build a plant there.
It was presented as a win for the local economy,
right,
creating jobs and boosting industry.
Exactly.
But what was the actual cost to the people of Alabama?
That's where Chomsky's critique comes in. While there may have been some job creation, the overall cost to Alabama taxpayers was significant.
Okay.
Daimler-Benz received substantial tax breaks.
Wow.
Free land. And even had the state agree to build infrastructure to support their operations.
So while a select few might benefit,
right,
the public ends up footing the bill.
Exactly.
So it's a classic example of privatized profits and socialized costs.
Chomsky argues that this selective application of the free market is a recurring theme.
Right.
He contends that the poor are subjected to the harsh realities of the market, while the wealthy and powerful enjoy protectionist policies and government subsidies.
It's a double standard that seems to permeate many aspects of our economic system.
He even uses the provocative example of plutonium disposal to illustrate this point.
So corporations generate this hazardous waste in pursuit of profit, but then it becomes the government's responsibility to deal with it. The public ultimately bears the cost and the risk.
And it raises questions about who truly benefits from this system and who bears the burden of its negative consequences.
This reminds me of an anecdote Chomsky shares about a Japanese bureaucrat who was utterly bewildered by a Harvard Business School class applauding a CEO for refusing government assistance during his company's bankruptcy.
It's a humorous anecdote, but it also highlights a certain blind faith in the free market. Even when corporations routinely receive government support in various forms.
And speaking of government support, Chomsky argues that the Pentagon system, despite the end of the Cold War, continues to function as a massive subsidy to corporations. The public funds research and development, while corporations reap the profits from technological advancements.
It raises the question of whether true innovation is being stifled by this system, or if it's simply being directed towards ends that don't necessarily benefit the public good.
This is all a lot to digest.
It is.
And we've only just scratched the surface of Chomsky's insights. As we move forward, we'll explore how these themes of power control and corporate influence manifest in areas like healthcare, crime, and even the media.
It's fascinating how these seemingly disparate issues are interconnected. I'm curious to see how Chomsky connects the dots further as we delve deeper into these excerpts.
Let's do it. All right.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
It's amazing how these threads of power and influence, they seem to weave their way into so many aspects of our lives. Speaking of which, I can't stop thinking about those two towering structures in Boston. The John Hancock and Prudential buildings.
Oh, yes. Chomsky uses those as a jumping-off point to discuss healthcare. He suggests that these insurance giants were positioned to play a major role in managing the U.S. healthcare system under Clinton's proposed reforms.
So instead of prioritizing public well-being, the focus shifts to which entities stand to profit the most from the system.
It certainly raises questions about the motivations behind healthcare reform. Chomsky argues that the push for change stemmed more from the rising costs becoming unbearable for businesses than from genuine concern for the average person's health.
He then delves into this concept of managed competition, which sounds like a rather bureaucratic way of saying, let the big insurance companies run the show.
Essentially, yes.
And Chomsky argues that this approach would have disproportionately disadvantaged the poor and working class.
Those who need healthcare the most would ironically end up with less access or facing higher costs.
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does.
If the goal is to improve healthcare for everyone, wouldn't a system that prioritizes those with the greatest needs make more sense?
Chomsky contrasts this market-driven approach with progressive single-payer systems like Canada's, where healthcare is treated as a fundamental right, not a commodity to be bought and sold.
And remember, we saw that a majority of Americans actually preferred the Canadian model, which makes you wonder why it's never seriously been considered as a viable option in the U.S.
It does make you think about the power dynamics at play, doesn't it? Who benefits from the current system? And who stands to lose if it were to change? Chomsky argues that the U.S. healthcare system, as it stands, prioritizes expensive high-tech interventions over preventative care and basic public health measures.
It's like focusing on treating the symptoms while neglecting the underlying causes.
Precisely, that illness. And this ties into Chomsky's broader point about the third worldization of the U.S. He observes trends of growing inequality, declining real wages, increasing job insecurity, and the erosion of social safety nets. These factors, he argues, are pushing the U.S. towards a third world model.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
It is.
The idea that the wealthiest nation in the world is experiencing these trends that we typically associate with developing countries.
Chomsky even links this third worldization to the rise in violent crime, suggesting that it's a symptom of social disintegration and the lack of opportunities for constructive action.
He even points to workplace shootings as a chilling example of this phenomenon. Makes you wonder if there's more to the issue of mass shootings than just mental health, as is often portrayed in the media.
It's certainly a complex issue with many contributing factors.
Now, shifting gears a bit, Chomsky takes us into the realm of media propaganda and the control of information. He starts by recounting the historical battle for control of radio in the U.S.
It's interesting how radio, the first major mass communication technology since the printing press, became a battleground for competing ideologies.
In much of the world, public radio emerged as the dominant model, while the U.S. went in a different direction.
Chomsky argues that this wasn't just a pragmatic decision, but a reflection of the deep-seated belief in the power of the free market, even when it comes to information.
So the idea is that a marketplace of ideas will naturally lead to the truth prevailing. But does that hold up in reality?
That's where Chomsky's critique comes in. He argues that this marketplace is inherently skewed because it assumes a level playing field, which doesn't exist when you have corporations with vast resources controlling the means of communication.
He then connects this to the emergence of public broadcasting in the U.S., arguing that it was actually a strategic move by commercial broadcasters to avoid public interest obligations.
By allowing for a small, underfunded public system, the corporate giants were able to deflect criticism and further consolidate their control over the airwaves.
It's a clever way to maintain the appearance of choice while ensuring that the dominant narrative remains in their hands.
And Chomsky warns that this same battle for control is being waged today with the internet and emerging technologies. He emphasizes the need for vigilance to prevent a repeat of history where corporate interests dictate the flow of information.
It seems that the battleground may have changed, but the players and the stakes remain largely the same.
And it's not just about overt censorship. Chomsky argues that the media, even without direct interference, consistently promotes the interests of its owners. He points to the inherent filtering process within media organizations, ensuring that those who rise through the ranks have internalized corporate values.
So it's not about explicitly telling people what to think. It's about creating an environment where those in positions of influence already align with the corporate worldview.
It's a subtle but highly effective form of control. Chomsky also highlights the media's tendency to focus on personalized narratives like sports and celebrity culture as a way to distract from substantive issues that might threaten the status quo. Remember his example of the Tonya Harding scandal?
It became a media circus, consuming public attention, while far more important issues were being ignored.
And this connects to the broader theme of how power operates in society. By keeping the public distracted and entertained, those in control can continue to operate with minimal scrutiny.
It's a bit like the old bread and circuses strategy.
Every apt analogy.
Keep the masses entertained while the real decisions are being made behind closed doors.
And this brings us to the final section of our deep dive, where Chomsky tackles the interconnected issues of globalization inequality and the potential for ecological catastrophe. Globalization and inequality, and those are certainly hot-button issues these days. And then there's the looming threat of ecological disaster.
Yeah. Where does Chomsky even begin to unpack all of that?
He starts by challenging a commonly held assumption that global economic growth automatically benefits everyone. He contrasts the optimistic view, often presented in mainstream media, with the stark reality of increasing poverty in many parts of the world, despite overall economic expansion.
So it's not simply about whether the pie is getting bigger, but about how that pie is being sliced.
Exactly.
And who gets the biggest pieces.
Chomsky uses the example of Latin America, where despite periods of economic growth, poverty and inequality have persisted.
Right.
He argues that this is a direct result of policies that prioritize the interest of wealthy nations and corporations over the well-being of the people in those countries.
So instead of supporting policies that allow developing nations to build their own industries and economies, they're kept in a state of dependency, supplying cheap labor and resources to wealthier nations.
That's Chomsky's argument.
It's like saying, we'll help you develop, but only in ways that benefit us.
Right.
It doesn't seem like a very sustainable or equitable approach.
And Chomsky connects this to the rise of unregulated speculative capital. With the dismantling of the Bretton Woods system, which provided some stability to global finance. Capital is now free to flow around the world chasing short-term profits.
So instead of being invested in long-term productive enterprises, capital is essentially being gambled on Wall Street.
That's a great analogy.
Creating bubbles and instability?
Chomsky argues that this shift towards speculative capital has contributed to a global economic environment characterized by low growth, stagnant wages, and increasing inequality.
And this leads to a race to the bottom where corporations seek out the lowest wages and the weakest environmental regulations, further exacerbating these problems.
Chomsky points to trade agreements like NAFTA and GATT as examples of this dynamic. He argues that these agreements, often touted as free trade deals, actually prioritize the rights of investors and corporations over the well-being of workers and the environment.
So it's not really about free trade, it's about tilting the playing field in favor of those with the most economic power.
And Chomsky argues that this has led to a concerted effort to dismantle social safety nets and worker protections, all in the name of maximizing corporate profits.
It's a bleak picture, isn't it?
It is.
It feels like we're on this runaway train headed for ecological and social disaster, and no one seems to be in control. So where do we go from here? What can we do with these insights?
Chomsky doesn't offer easy answers. But he encourages us to start by questioning the systems we live under and becoming aware of the forces shaping our world. Knowledge is power, and by understanding how these systems operate, we can begin to identify opportunities for action.
So it's about connecting these seemingly abstract ideas to our own lives and communities, recognizing that these issues of power and control are not just theoretical. They have real-world consequences for all of us.
Absolutely. And it's about connecting with others who share these concerns, building movements for change, and holding those in power accountable.
It's been quite a journey exploring these excerpts from Chomsky's work. He certainly challenges us to think critically and to look beyond the surface of things.
He reminds us that the systems we live under are often not what they seem, and that it's up to us to question, to challenge, and to work towards a more just and sustainable world.
There's certainly a lot to think about here, and we encourage you to continue exploring these ideas. Where can we find more of Chomsky's work? What are the next steps we can take to make a difference? Those are questions worth pondering as you navigate the complexities of our world.